I have a rendezvous with death at some disputed barricade when spring comes back with rustling shade and apple blossom fill the air. I have a rendezvous with death when spring brings back blue days and fair. It may be he shall take my hand and lead me into dark land and close my eyes and quench my breath. It may be I shall pass him still. I have a rendezvous with death on some scarred slope of battered hill when spring comes round again this year and first meadow flowers appear. God knows 'twere better to be deep, pillowed in silk and scented down, where love throbs out in blissful sleep, pulse nigh to pulse and breath to breath, where hushed awakenings are dear. But I've a rendezvous with death at midnight in some flaming town when spring trips north again this year, and to my pledged word am true, I shall not fail that rendezvous.
The war that was supposed to be over by Christmas is still being fought bitterly 2 years after the fatal shooting of Archduke Franz Ferdinand and his wife Sophie in Sarajevo on the 28th of June, 1914. This insane slaughter, the Great War, is the almost inevitable result of tensions that had been brewing in Europe for a considerable period, as traditional power bases were changing and new alliances were formed. The Entente Cordiale had been signed between England and France in 1904. It pledged mutual support to these countries' colonial policies, though it was ultimately aimed at curbing Germany's growing power. By 1907, the Entente was expanded to include Russia and became the Triple Entente. Now Germany and her traditional ally, the Austro-Hungarian Empire, are virtually surrounded by potentially hostile nations, nations that will take exception to any militaristic expansion or intervention that can further shift the balance of power. Nonetheless, Germany begins a large military expansion program, and the other nations follow suit. All this rattling of sabers isn't helped by a particularly inept group of crowned heads of state that largely see war as an opportunity for self-glorification, or, at best, justified national expansion. In Russia, Tsar Nikolai II believes it is his duty to preserve absolute power, but has little talent for leadership. The Emperor of Austria-Hungary, Franz Joseph, is in his 80s when war breaks out, and already a broken man before the assassination of his nephew and heir, Franz Ferdinand. Kaiser Wilhelm II of Germany, a grandson of Queen Victoria, believes he rules by divine right, though his policies are generally contradictory and confused. His aggressive colonial, commercial, and naval expansion program was the main contributing factor that persuaded Great Britain to enter the alliance with France and Russia. King George V of Great Britain has less direct powers than his German half-cousin, but he is head of state and he does support a war against Germany. Sarajevo is little more than an excuse for the opposing sides, spoiling for a fight, to launch the biggest disaster to descend on Europe since the Black Death. Austria declares war on Serbia. Germany declares war on Russia, and France and Great Britain finally declare war on Germany, who marches on Belgium and France. The madness has begun. And voices of reason are drowned in the clamor for war.
They are completely mad. A war between European nations is a civil war, the most monumentally stupid thing that has ever happened.
At the Western Front, it soon becomes a war of attrition, and losses are mounting alarmingly. not least due to the German strategy suggested by General von Falkenhayn. In its simplicity, it involves inflicting heavier losses on the enemy than he can inflict on you, and hoping consequentially the opposition will bleed to death. Von Falkenhayn's plan has the personal approval of Kaiser Wilhelm and is helped by the Entente's often cavalier attitude towards even horrendous casualties. During the German offensive at Ypres in April 1915, the Allies lose some 60,000 men, whilst the Germans suffer 35,000 casualties. The British and French offensive between Neuve-Chapelle and Arras in May and June results in even heavier casualties, 252,000 Allied and 140,000 German.
We are the dead. Short days ago we lived, felt dawn, saw sunset glow, loved and were loved, and now we lie in Flanders fields. Take up our quarrel with the foe. To you from failing hands we throw the torch, be yours to hold high.
The mounting losses make American support increasingly important, particularly since Great Britain does not have conscription the first couple of years of the war and relies solely on volunteers. But the USA is fiercely neutral, and President Wilson is intent on keeping his country out of the war. Despite some hawks within the American political system, the general feeling in the country is that the war is an internal European affair, and there is absolutely no reason why America's young men should travel halfway round the world to get killed. But then, an incident happens that is close to changing attitudes: the sinking of the liner Lusitania. On May the 7th, 1915, the wireless station at Old Head off Kinsale in County Cork, Ireland, sends a message to the Cunard office in Liverpool reading, "The Lusitania was sunk by a submarine at 2:33 o'clock this afternoon, 8 miles south by west off this point." At 5 o'clock that same afternoon, it is still believed that the passengers are safe, but the reality is less encouraging. Of 1,253 passengers and 300 crew members, 1,198 people die in what is the first major U-boat attack on a civilian vessel. This new phase in submarine warfare shocks the world, and not least the USA. There are 128 American casualties, and Theodore Roosevelt's pro-war campaign is given a significant boost. But even the former president and Rough Rider does not manage to completely change public opinion at this stage, as the anti-war campaign still holds the upper hand. Though the sympathy is with the Allies, it still isn't sufficient to persuade either the American government or the American people that war is an acceptable option. On the Western Front, the War of Attrition continues unabated, and the casualties are still mounting. There are some attempts to establish breakthroughs in late 1915, and particularly in early and mid-1916. The Germans launch an offensive at Verdun in February, and the British start the famous Battle of the Somme on the first day of July.